Ale!
It is, isn't it? I don't think it needs to be turned up. I think if I maybe, can people hear me without it? Because I'd actually feel if I put it there, would that be all right, Rubens?
No.
It wouldn't.
No.
The other thing is you can
hear things in the back?
You can hear your own voice, and there's something really disturbing about hearing how you sound.
Well, that's all we've got time for. So thanks for. Right. I'm grateful that Will has come all this way from Cleveland Park Road or wherever it is, not far. But I am grateful because you've been doing a lot of these readings.
Yeah, a few, yeah. It's loud now.
And I saw Will talk about this at the Wanstead Tap, which is a great place. They do lots of readings. I'd urge you to look at their programme and support what they do. But I did. I got a copy of the book, and it's perhaps my favourite book of the year so far. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a timeless book. There's so many things I love about it. But you haven't all read about that, so there's no point in me just banging on about that. Let's find out a little bit more about the book. So, Will, you have an interesting background, I think. Can we talk a little bit about how you come to be here?
Yeah.
A very quick 90-second synopsis of Will Ash.
Oh my. So, until about 4 years ago, I think, which in a way was the initial reason for you maybe thinking, oh, we could do something, was I used to run a record label called Big Dada. We did acts like Roots Manuva and Young Fathers, who was playing before I started. Which
It
I thought
wasn't
was
coincidental.
a nice touch, I thought. And so, in a way, the book, it's a kind of odd hybrid in a way, because it is, if you're interested in the history of Epping Forest, I hope there's enough in it that you'll find that side of it interesting, but it's also partly the story of me giving up my job and wandering around Epping Forest being scared of dogs. They're the two main themes.
It actually says that on the back. That's the synopsis of the book.
More or less, yeah.
But before this, so this is your first foray into non-fiction.
Yeah.
And in the book, you explain what's brought you to it. And again, we'll explore that in a little bit. But prior to this, you left work and you became a novelist, full-time novelist? Or author?
I had two books published the best part of 10 years ago with Faber that I wrote while I was running Big Dada. So they were done, the first one I actually wrote on a Palm Pilot on the train from Walthamstow down to Vauxhall, and I used to walk to the office from there. So I did both things at the same time, and then at some point I just thought, well, the truth is I was fed up with my job, and part of the book is about what happens, that period that a lot of people hit at some point in their life, in my case in my mid-40s, where you start to think, oh God, am I going to do this forever? And so I decided to stop doing the label, and the idea then was that I was going to write my masterpiece once I had the time and energy, that I was going to write this great novel, which never happened. Hence the wandering around in the woods, hence the book that we have here instead. The story is really that I suppose I might as well say is that I started how I describe it in the book, and obviously there's although it is non-fiction, the one person there's room to have a bit of fun with in non-fiction in terms of how you deal with the truth is yourself, because you're unlikely to sue yourself basically for misrepresentation. So the story I tell in the book is that I started going out to the woods, and it is true, but I pretend that it isn't because it's a bit embarrassing. I started going out to Epping Forest because I had nothing else to do, because the book that I'd said that I was going to write wasn't really happening. And then I started telling people that I was writing a book about Epping Forest because it was less embarrassing than just wandering around Epping Forest. And then what I found was that the gap between pretending to write a book and actually writing a book was very thin, because obviously you had to know something about the woods. So you then I started going to the British Library and reading books. And, and so eventually it just seemed like I might as well actually write the book as pretend to write the book. It was less effort, if anything.
In the book, I mean, you do a fair job. Again, we'll explore this in more detail, but you are very, very modest, very self-deprecating. And what you've just described there makes it sound really easy. But this is a super intelligent book, and I don't mean to put anybody off who's scared of that, of super intelligent. It is, you know how some words go together, meticulously researched. I want to find a better word than that. It is very brilliantly researched, I think. I love how it's structured, how it's put together. And there's so much in here that, again, we'll get to. But let's start with some basics. I'm going to start with some easy questions.
I like
Strange Labyrinth. Now, I've read the book, so I know why, or where the word Strange Labyrinth, or words come from, Strange Labyrinth. How far into your meanderings in the forest, you're wandering around, when does the title come for the book?
It actually came relatively early. The Strange Labyrinth, one of the people I talk about in the book is a woman called Mary Roth, who was I have to think this through very carefully because I always say it slightly wrong. She was the first woman to publish a full-length prose work in English, it was Jacobean, 1621, I think it came out. See, I haven't done one of these talks for a few weeks, and all these facts that a few weeks ago I had just like that are all vanishing again into the background. And it's from a poem that she wrote, a sonnet that she wrote, in which she says, in this strange labyrinth, how shall I turn? And I came across that poem quite early, and it kind of spoke to my experience of the forest itself, because I the one thing that I always say is it's a very confusing and contradictory space in a way, and so it seemed like the right title for the book, really. Yeah.
What I liked in the book, so the book is it's obviously about Epping Forest. It's not so much a history of Epping Forest, although we learn about how forests come about. And again, I think it would be helpful to explain to the audience in a bit what a forest is, because you say it's the common conception of forest isn't necessarily true. So what is a forest, Will?
Oh no! You see, I just told you I haven't read it I haven't looked at it for weeks.
What do you think of forest?
Well, you see, what I thought a forest was a big wood. That was my basic. If someone had said to me, "What is a forest?" You say, "Well, it's a large wood." But obviously, actually, technically speaking, it's king's hunting land that's been afforested in order that the king can use it for his leisure pursuits, and all the wild animals of that land are the king's property, and the land is supposed to be maintained for the benefit of those animals. So you can't fence it off, and you can't do anything which would mean that the animals which he might want to come and hunt one day next year or something are in any way damaged. So it's interesting in a way, because it's going back to the theme of contradictoriness. It's something which we think of a forest as an open space, but actually it's also a form of enclosure, in the sense that it's land, it's king's land, which the king keeps the way that he wants it, I guess. Yeah.
And what we find in this book, the cast of characters, which includes yourself, are people who see the forest as a retreat or a place to escape to. And that's, most of the characters here are there because they weren't born there, but they came to this space. And the characters in the book are quite remarkable. I mean, you've chosen them because they are remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I avoided all the boring ones.
And you start off with Joseph Epstein and his wives,
Yeah.
Now, why did you start with Joseph? So it's not chronological. So one would start maybe of the characters with Mary Roth. So why did you start with Epstein, and why is Epstein there?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, but which isn't being self-deprecating. I'm really not 100% sure why I started with Jacob Epstein, other than, and in a way, I see that section as being about Margaret, his wife, rather than about Jacob. Margaret suffers the fate of many wives of famous men, in that she ran Jacob Epstein's life. She came up with the ideas for his sculptures. She found the models. She lobbied to get him out of the army in the First World War, and yet in most of the biographies, she's a shadow. They don't know where she was from. They don't know how she met him, or anything about where she comes from. And she just sits in the book, and the standard biography is they're very patronising about this woman who, as far as I could see, reading between the lines, basically ran everything that he did. So, and it was her who brought them out to the forest. So, and the story of that is that, as a whole, Margaret chose Joseph's models and Jacob's models, and those models also tended to sleep with Jacob. So she was the person who found him his sexual partners as well. And I can't remember the year, but anyway, when he meets I've forgotten her name as well. This isn't going well. Catherine. Anyway, he meets a new woman. Independently,
there's a lot of them, which is why it's easy to get mixed up, I think.
It's very poor, though. I really feel like I should have done some reading beforehand. Anyway, has a relationship with Catherine. When Margaret finds out, she invites Catherine to come to their house in Bloomsbury, locks the door behind her and shoots her in the shoulder. Doesn't kill her, but shoots her, injures her quite seriously. And shortly after that, she decides that she's going to find a house out in the countryside where they can get out of London. And the general theory is that she did this to kind of separate Jacob from Catherine, and Catherine, I should point out that when Margaret dies, Jacob Epstein did eventually marry Catherine. He had a long-term relationship with her. I'm really embarrassed that I've forgotten her surname, but it's all in the book, so I'm sure we can deal with that later. So really, for me, it was the first. The reason that it's a way in is it's because I felt she didn't. Yeah, at the time you could get a train from Bloomsbury out to Loughton, where their house was, and I think it took about 20 minutes. So it wasn't exactly this huge divide over which they would be unable to see each other. So my feeling was that she was trying to do something else by bringing him out to the forest, to do with the forest itself. And so it was a way in for me to start talking about what an odd and in some senses unworldly space the forest is, and quite a magical space. And I don't mean that when you talk about magic, it always sounds a bit trite, really, but
there's quite a bit of magic in this book, or at least you talk about it, and you talk about it, as a skeptic, of course. And this is a book about you. It should be explained. The subtitle of the book. It's about outlaws, poets, mystics, murderers, and a coward. Hands up if you know who the coward might be. I think a little unfair on oneself, although you do give a very good defence of cowardice as being a
sensible.
Yes, and again, one doesn't want to give away too much in this book, but it is about overcoming your fears in here and overcoming some of your scepticism, and as part of this, and we come on to Ken Campbell in a bit, but you go and visit a mystic, a psychic, which is not something you would do normally. But the book is, I mean, you mentioned lots of people here, Crowley, I think, and others, magicians, because the forest is for many people, a magical place, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and I mean, there's a statistic in here, which is actually taken from a book by Sarah Maitland about how often Grimm's fairy tales mention the forest, and I can't remember what once again I failed you again, but it's a huge.
I think of the 281 Grimm's tales, something like 170 of them are set in the forest. And we all know about, was it Hansel and Gretel or was that Hans Christian Andersen? But we can think of them.
Yeah, so there is something about it, and it's something that if you spend time if you go out to Epping Forest on your own, you quickly, especially without a dog, which is the way most middle-aged men travel through the forest with a dog, and it must be said that you do get some odd looks if you fail to take a canine, a companion with you. But if you go out, you do get those moments where the light changes or something moves, and even people less cowardly than me you get a little shiver of something unusual about that space without it actually being. I'm not trying to claim it actually necessarily is magic, but I just think it's an odd, quite a space which can be quite uncomfortable at times, but also. No, I'm just going to stop there. I've run out of steam on that sentence.
You are one of the things you do, and obviously this is a book written for people anywhere, not just for those of us in Walthamstow who visit the Epping Forest, and you. I think very, very cleverly describe where the forest is in relation to other parts of London. I particularly like, I thought this was very ingenious, the letter Q. So you describe, if you explain to an outsider where Epping Forest was in London in the southeast, Will has a great way of doing this. You'll explain it better than me, I think.
Okay, so if you turn a Q on its side, a capital Q on its side, then and imagine the outside of the ring as the M25 and the inside of the ring as the North Circular, then Epping Forest is the tail. Running out. There we are. There's I even drew a picture of it as well.
You did. I just thought it was ingenious. I'd never seen that before. I have explained this to other people now, and I will do so for the rest of my life. So thank you for that one little tip there.
Fantastic.
The book is a very funny book. I think I'll ask you to read a section from it. It may not be a funny book, so I may be teeing this up a little bit earlier. But you come across as a very likeable person in this book. Although
that's the fictional element. You say,
well, you're open, you're honest, you're very engaging, but I like the humour as well. There are some very wry observations that made me laugh, and I went back and read them again, and I saw things outside them. I say it's a very easy read, but the thing I find most astounding, which I think where it is a triumph, is how you've knitted in all these other elements, and I think it displays. And although again you downplay this so much. An intellectual ease. You cover so much ground and with an assurance and a confidence. So you're not afraid when we're talking about Mary Roth. You will make some comparisons with the French writer Roussel, is it? Who I'd never come across before. But in terms of the complexity of her writing or the indecipherable nature of it, you're not afraid to take on literary criticism. Olafur Eliasson, you talk about him, philosophy, the Rosicrucians, but there's a kind of thing. So I don't know much about this, and then in the next paragraph you will display a knowingness, which I thought was fantastic. How do you answer that question? It's not a question.
Well, first of all, I'll say it's really very kind, and the truth is that I'm not. It's a sum of a mixture of research and things that I was interested in anyway. So Raymond Roussel was a writer that I've been interested in for a long while. So it struck me in that sense. It wasn't meant to be a particularly clever reference. It was just the only point of reference I had, really. So I think, but I hope, I would certainly hope that, it's meant to be. I didn't want to write once I decided that I wasn't going to write a straightforward history of Epping Forest, for reasons that I can talk about, it had to be personal in a sense. So I a certain amount of it had to come from me and the things that I'd read and the TV program. I mean, it's not all that highbrow. I think there's a section in which I mentioned the young ones or whatever. So in the same sense, they're all things that I grew up with or know about. Or
you mentioned the young ones, but in an insightful way. I'm not going to say any more. I'll let others judge things. I did say I'd ask you to read a couple of chapters, excerpts from this, not chapters so much. I think it's important.
Although the air conditioning is nice, so I guess you could all just sort of nod off.
I can't remember now. We discussed perhaps 3 readings. Was the first one Ken Campbell?
Shall we see how we go? Yeah, we've got. You suggested Ken and Penny, and then we thought we might do the Lady in the House ASHON.
Yeah.
So I can do whichever one of those you'd like me to do.
Let's talk about Ken Campbell. And let's introduce everybody to Ken Campbell through this reading.
Find it. I started off putting these things in my book, and then people keep asking me to read different sections, and it's now got so complicated that it's actually more difficult than just not having them in at all. It was a terrible mistake. Another one. Right. Even if you didn't know his name, you'd probably recognise Ken. A short, pot-bellied, bald man with a hooked nose and explosive eyebrows, which he kept untrimmed in order to be certain of picking up TV gigs as a mad scientist. He was Alf Garnett's neighbour Fred Johnson in the long-running sitcom In Sickness and in Health, made a cameo appearance in Fawlty Towers, and fronted a number of popular science series for Channel 4 in the late 1990s. In a perhaps unique straddling of popular entertainment and the avant-garde, he also had roles in films by Derek Jarman and Peter Greenaway, although he acts just the same in all of them, as if he's both surprised and rather pleased by how crap it all is, and is hoping to make it a little worse. Mike Leigh, the film director who knew him from the pair's time at RADA, described Ken as the outsider's outsider, which is something like winning the Nobel Prize for outsiderdom, though it would have been even better if Mike Leigh actually was a gentleman of the road instead of only looking like one. It's a mean joke about Mike Leigh. Someone who knows him said he'd be really upset as well. Stuart Lee has described Ken as a shaman, clown and Zen ventriloquist, which starts to hint at the man's qualities. Equally enlightening is a comparison drawn by the actor-director and now Thomas Cromwell TV crumpet, Mark Rylance. Towards the end of his life, Ken started a company that specialised in improv with a Shakespearean flavour, the School of Night. Rylance, then creative director at the Globe Theatre, had them in to do a performance, but regretted later not getting Ken back for more. He compared him to the first great fool in Shakespeare's theatrical company, Will Kemp, allegedly pushed out because he annoyed the Bard of Avon by improvising and mucking around too much. Shakespeare's fools have been described as reality instructors, a phrase taken from Saul Bellow, in whose books a variety of lawyers, hoods and rogues educate his central characters in matters of perspective. It's the perfect description of Campbell's methods and aims, that combination of humour and hitting you over the head with a big stick, though his realism, both theatrical and metaphysical, was liberatory, expansive, explosive even, rather than being designed to rein anyone in. The main lesson Ken wanted to teach is that reality is much odder, much more unstable, much funnier, much less safe than we might believe. He's not trying to bring anyone back down to earth. That would be irresponsible. In pursuit of this aim, Ken employed different techniques at different times in his career, most of them involving a joke and a cudgel. In the late 1970s, he and his new company, the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool, staged Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy to great acclaim. The novels, dealing with the age-old clash between the Illuminati, evil men in suits, and the Discordians, hippie worshippers of chaos, aimed to repurpose paranoia and conspiracy theory for an emancipatory cause, perhaps not entirely successfully. Wilson himself came over from America to see the play when it transferred to the brand new Cottesloe Auditorium at the National Theatre, where he supplied Bill Nighy with performance-enhancing LSD and declared, "I've come to the conclusion that this isn't literature. It's too late in the day for literature. This is magic." That was certainly Ken's aim, although I'm not sure he was there yet. As envisaged by Campbell, the Illuminatus play was broken down into 5 subplays. Each subplay had 5 acts, and each act was 23 minutes long. The number 5 is very important to Discordians, as is 23, because 2 plus 3 equals 5. That meant the entire play lasted for about 10 hours. The original rationale for the play's length was presumably the amount of material needing to be covered, plus a certain relish for annoying people. I believe, though, that Ken discovered that something happens when you produce a play that long. In particular, that at some point very close to the end of his epic, he noticed a change, an odd ripple running through the audience that he needed to explore further. That, at least, is my explanation for his next big production, The Warp. Based on the life of its... am I going on too long, or should I just do the next paragraph? I think we can probably do it. I'll do it quickly. Based on the life of its writer, British counterculturalist Neil Oram, The Warp is in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest play ever, clocking in at somewhere around 23 hours. But the whole purpose of making it so long was that at some point after the 10-hour mark, it ceased to be a play at all. Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian film director, was a fan of the cinematic long shot, indeed the very long shot. Discussing it, he explained that if the regular length of a shot is increased, one becomes bored. But if you keep on making it longer, it piques your interest. And if you make it even longer, a new quality emerges, a special intensity of attention. What did The Warp become? What new quality emerged? Something beyond performance, perhaps. Something which, not least by dint of how long it had stayed in the audience's life, became part of their reality. As one of them commented, staggering out, wide-eyed, smiling beatifically, "I've just had one of the most amazing experiences I ever had in the theatre. It's absolutely mind-blowing. What Ken Campbell is doing is transforming theatre. It's transforming the audience." The performance becomes ritual. The ritual becomes reality. Reality is changed. Magic.
Because they are what?
Just because you talk for so long.
Yeah. What's remarkable about Ken? I mean, there's you described him as a visitor to Walthamstow marshes with his dog.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, so Ken Campbell would regularly be seen on Walthamstow marshes. He died about 15 years ago, didn't he? So
I think a bit less, but I forget.
10
years,
it would have been a nice character to see.
Yeah, I saw him once at Walthamstow Central Tube Station carrying a big stick, actually, just walking through with this big stick over his shoulder, looking sort of quizzical.
He was from Gants Hill, I think you said.
Yeah.
If anybody likes just bringing a bit of musical element in, if anyone interested in the KLF, any of that stuff, John Higgs's book, Anton Wilson, Ken Campbell, it's all connected, and they know it's connected because that's Bill Drummond's whole career. Anyway, that's an aside. You just said...
There's a brilliant story. Can I just tell the Bill Drummond story?
Yes.
Which is that he worked on, I think, on The Warp when it was at the Roundhouse.
Oh.
And he did the sets, and I think they had a toilet mounted on stage, and Ken sent him out to get some glue to fix it. It got a crack in or something, and he'd had enough by this stage, and he just walked off and never went back. Went back to Liverpool, started managing bands. Years later, he wanted advice. I can't remember who he was managing, but they were very difficult bands that he managed early on. I think Echo and the Bunnymen, maybe, and another, maybe Teardrop Explodes as well. Both at the same. Anyway, very complicated, very difficult. And he wanted some advice from. So I'm going to go and ask Ken for some advice. He found out where he lived, and he went to his house. Ken opened the door and said, "Have you got that glue yet?" Brilliant.
You said earlier you didn't when you were writing this book, you didn't want it to be just the normal history, and you said, "I'll explain why." Here's that opportunity.
Yeah, I shouldn't have done that, should I? I should have just kept quiet. I think because what I decided, I think books that I like reflect some in their form, reflect something about what they're about, and so I wanted the book Strange Labyrinth to be a bit like Epping Forest. And as I said, to me, Epping Forest is this slightly contradictory, confusing place where once you step off the main rides onto any other little path through the woods, you find yourself usually on a path that, rather than taking you from A to B, seems to be designed just to get you lost. You know, you circle around for a bit, go up and down, end up in a holly bush. And so I wanted some of that atmosphere to sort of imbue what the book was like.
And that worked for me.
Good.
I like that. It does go off on a tangent or another path, and I enjoyed that. And then you come back to the main theme again.
Hopefully,
It has got themes. I mean, it is proper work of literature. There are themes in there. I don't know why I sound so surprised. Going back to Ken,
because I just keep underplaying it so badly. So it is actually.
Going back to Ken, I think it was Ken who introduces us as a reader and you to this phrase that pops up in the book, or a word, enantiodromia. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. Enantiodromia, I think, but I don't really know. I haven't actually checked. Yeah.
But it is a theme within the book, because it is, again, there's an easy way. Well, you talk about in terms of a tree, climbing a tree. It can be an antidromic experience because
there's always the side you climb up, and then very close to you there's the side you're likely to fall out. So enantiodromia is in effect I think he says that he's taken it from Jung, or he says that only 3 people had ever used the word before him. But basically he says it's that everything is double faceted in effect, and he used it to run a series of drama workshops where he would get people to cover up half their face, and then you would see your 2 facets. And he says his 2 facets are the spanking squire and Elsie, who's a sort of sad and miserable housewife. And so he said that actually he was doing the workshops anyway, but once he could call them enantiodromic, he could charge more for them. And yeah, so this idea of the two sides of things, the 2 facets, the 2 contradictory facets of things, does, as you say, it runs through the book. It's including how I write about myself as well as the forest. Yeah.
One of the other themes is the theme of identity, and you again have said this is, on the personal level, this is you not quite discovering yourself, but finding other parts of you and overcoming fears and embracing that desire, need for change that one has at a certain stage in their life. The other characters, and I thought I hadn't considered this until you pointed it out towards the end of the book. Again, identity features across all of them, in that almost all the characters are known by a certain name, which isn't their real name very often. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more, because I want to push on. I mean, some of the characters, and again, I learnt a lot. So I didn't know anything about the poet John Clare, the peasant's poet. Is there anybody here? Ralph, I'm looking at you at the back. PhD in literature, blah, blah, blah.
And works at PA.
So he's going to be telling us all about what we said wrong in a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, John Clare, I mean, a fascinating...
That's my fear. That's my biggest fear, is being told that I've got it all wrong.
That and PC Connor.
And dogs.
And dogs.
And there's policemen, just those 3 things.
But John Clare is another character who, not by volition, but finds himself in the forest. There are rather peculiar circumstances in that he's in an asylum at Lippet Hill. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it's just down the road from, if anyone knows the Owl Pub, it's just literally on the corner down the road from there, and it's got a blue plaque on the side saying that he was there. Although it said he stayed there, which is he did. He wasn't really fully in prison there, but as a man massively in debt with no money, somewhere he didn't know, it wasn't very easy for him to leave or get home, which eventually he did. He was there for 4 years, I think, and then he met a gypsy in the woods and asked him if he would help him find the path back north, because he was from Northamptonshire. And the gypsy said yes until he found out he didn't have any money, and then he vanished off. But John Clare, the next day or 2 days later, left the asylum and walked home to Northamptonshire, and he lay down every night to sleep with his head pointing in the direction of the pole star, so as he'd know which way was north in the morning. And he chewed on grass, and then he ate some of his tobacco, and he walked home. And although the really sad part of the story is that within 6 months he was in an asylum in Northamptonshire, so it wasn't quite the escape he was hoping for, I don't think.
This is it. The Epping Forest, I mean, is quite sizable. Not the biggest forest by any means. I think you point this out. But again, throughout the book, each chapter is a location within the forest, and within that location, there's usually somebody like John Clare, who's associated through that, which you've discovered through your research. And again, are there either because they're escaping for something or looking for something? Now we, again, I'm not deliberately bringing in the musical elements here, but I think one of the characters that we know in the book, because he's a contemporary character, so many of them are obviously ancient or dead, but Penny Rambo of Crass is somebody you went and visited a couple of times, and you write very fondly, very profoundly about Penny. And again, last year here we celebrated the Small Wonder record label, and we celebrated that largely because they were fortunate or wise enough to bring about 3 or 4 records, and one of those was the Crass record. So I wanted to talk, because this is really a rock and roll book club, about Penny and G and Crass.
Yeah. So, sorry, did I interrupt you? Did you want to? No, okay. So, I don't know how many people here know Crass. I think you do have to be of a certain age. You have to have been a certain age in 1980, basically. I think, and if you're too young or too old, they won't mean anything to you. But they were at the time, very radical anarchist punk band, or at least that's how they seemed to me. I came across them when I was, I think, about 14. I went up to the in Leicestershire. You moved school at 14. You went to college, and I went to college and I met a couple of Crass fans who seemed terrifyingly cool and also very politically turned on, and they were vegetarians, and they were going to smash the system, basically, but in quite a neat way. I remember going around to my friend's house, who was the first time I went to his house, and I was amazed by how tidy his bedroom was, and his anarchy sign was really neatly put up on the wall. And I said, "What's this? You want to be an anarchist?" He said, "Just because I'm an anarchist doesn't mean I can't be organised." Which was a good lesson for me. And so Crass, I approached them actually with a certain amount of trepidation, because to me, age 14, they seemed incredibly terrifying in a way, because I thought they'd be very I thought they'd be full of political certainty and very correct about everything, and very quick to call you up on any faults or personal moral failings, which was about as far from the truth as you can get, because they're actually not like that at all. they're actually very very warm, open and interested people, and actually have all kinds of opinions which make me sort of go, can you say that?
How?
And they don't like The Guardian, that's for sure.
How did you, and I share this, how does this conception of Crass get to be so wrong?
I don't know, really. I mean, I guess it's partly when you're 14, you maybe don't look into things in any great detail. I mean, there was something forbidding about them, and there's something very forbidding about their music. And people who, by the time they get to, I think it's Yes Sir I Will. I mean, it's pretty out there, and it's pretty harsh, and it's not the kind of thing you put on to bob your head and remember how great punk rock was. It's pretty crazy stuff. But the mistake was to presume that because that was how they presented what they were trying to do, that was all there was to them. That that there's nothing beyond that. That and also that people will still be exactly as they were in 1982, 40, 50 years later, however many years later, 30 something years later.
Penny Rambo is you probably both could say the leader of Crass, but perhaps the most well-known member. And prior, the band formed in something like 78, but Penny had lived in this place, Dial House, up near Ongar, so almost the furthest north you can get in the forest. And Dial House becomes had long been a commune, we'll use that word. But yeah, you said you'd read a bit about the couple of times you met Jeremy. I'm not quite sure if this will be the first visit or the...
I'll probably just do the first one, Yeah, I'm going to repeat some of what I've just said to you. There we are. The first time I saw Penny Rambo, he was dressed in straight-legged trousers of a dusty burgundy colour, hiking boots, a black vest, and atop his long, fine, grey blonde hair, a red beret with a red star the size of a child's fist embroidered on the front. Penny is in his early 70s, but possessed, appropriately considering his adopted surname, of a certain ageless je ne sais quoi, even when cutting the hedge. When I greeted him, he stopped strimming and smiled, essaying a lazy wave, then began gathering in orange electrical flecks. We ducked through a gate adorned with brightly coloured oriental flags, stepped over the mosaic in the concrete at our feet, and walked round the side of a large old house, all wooden wings and tumbled perspectives, so that it was hard at first sight to get a sense of what it was, how big it was, or how it fitted together. Penny led me into a garden which I can only describe as beautiful. The lawn was short and very green. Flowers flooded up from the beds. Bees moved calmly through the warmth of the air. It felt very easy to be there. All my nerves about the meeting ebbed away into a kind of sunstruck haze. Penny fetched us cups of Earl Grey tea and called G so the three of us could talk. G's a similar age to Penny, with grey hair down past her shoulders, a brown face, strong hands. Like Penny, she knows something about everything and isn't afraid to tell you, though their styles of delivery are very different. He circles in on a problem as if from a great distance, orbiting closer and closer. She is quietly direct, full of good humour, but not to be messed with. Before I knew what was going on, the two of them were having a dispute about whether the development of the internet signalled a definitive cultural break with the past or a seamless evolution. They carried on the conversation like a married couple bickering over who had forgotten to defrost the freezer. They were not a married couple, though, and had not been a couple at all in any romantic or sexual sense since the early 1970s. It was quite dizzying, but at the same time strangely relaxing, sitting there listening to them. A thrush calling from a tree, G leaping up from her chair to point out a passing steam train up on the track which ran along the bottom of the garden. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, when the line was still part of the London Tube network, the drivers often used to stop on the bridge we could see through the trees, so that the young punks who had travelled from all over the country could get out and scramble down the embankment. They came here to meet Penny Rambo, G Voucher, Steve Ignorant, Eve Libertine, Joy de Vivre, Pete Wright, Andy Palmer and Phil Free. They came to Dial House to meet Crass. You probably have to be of a certain age to remember Crass, somewhere between 10 and 25 in or around 1980. Arguably the most radical, polemical and politically engaged band to emerge from punk, and undisputed leaders of the second wave of that movement, they've been largely painted out of successive revivals of safety pin and bondage trouser nostalgia because of their refusal to fit, something which they saw as the point of punk, even as the rest of this supposed explosion of non-conformism found new and increasingly craven ways to belong. They can lay a reasonable claim to have introduced notions of radical feminism, vegetarianism, anti-Christianity, anti-authoritarianism and pacifism, if not into the cultural mainstream of early 1980s Britain, then certainly into the lives of many young men and women who are trying to escape its crushing grip. I can think of no better way to extol their virtues than by pointing out that their first album was slagged off by both Gary Bushell in Sounds and Tony Parsons in NME, the latter describing it as a nasty, worthless little record. With enemies like that, who needs friends?
And Crass and Penny are play an important role in this book, because I think not necessarily the bridge, but they link to other parts of it, the Wally Hopes and the Mix, who are part of the, we'll call it a modern, for the sake of it, anti-capitalist campaign. Their campaign against roads. Although people remember Swampy out in Newbury. Where was that? But yeah, again, it's the outlaw element in who come to the forest to escape persecution. And again, won't talk too much about it because I really would like people to get the book and read it. But it's all connected. But Jeremy, was going to call him Jeremy
Yes.
then.
You can.
There you go. Penny, aka Jeremy Ratter,
Yeah.
remarkably. Again, as you will find, an example of people who have a pseudonym, non-plume, escaping things. But also plays a key part for you because of his. He discovers himself, doesn't he? He becomes Zen-like. He has an episode. He has a heart attack, and I don't want to give too much away. He's alive and healthy. Did anyone come to when he gave a talk at the Small Wonder thing last year? Did anybody come? The anarchist at the end, G Voucher, who was exactly as you describe in the relationship, but at the end drew on the wall a big crass sign, which he thought was perfect.
Probably worth a lot of money. G's brilliant. I was absolutely G slightly terrified me. I stayed at Dara House, and there's a bit in the book where I wanted to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, but I'd been told by Penny not to wake up G because, you know, really he was very, whatever you do, don't wake up G. She really doesn't like it. So I didn't dare go to the loo. So I lay awake half the night going, oh no. Eventually I had to, but I don't think I did. Well, she didn't come out and get me, but so.
It's also part of the book where I think you give vent to some proper anger, because the book, the history of forests and land in this country is also the history of the Enclosure Acts.
Yeah.
And how punitive and totally anti-working class, the working person, those things were. And I think that the tone does change because I think you're very clear on how bad those things are. And again, you write, again, educated me on the Black Acts and the Waltham Blacks.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much people know about Enclosure. I think it is taught to us at school, although we didn't do much history at my school, so it was all pretty new to me. But I mean, it is astounding what a change it was, and I think the stat that I remember is that between 1700 and 1870 maybe, something like 22,000 miles of England was enclosed from common land into private land, and that's what enclosure basically is. It's the taking of common land into private ownership. So it's the first example in Britain of privatisation, in effect. And the thing that struck me reading accounts of it was how similar the moral justifications for this were to the justifications we still hear in relation to privatisation and in relation to how we treat poor people. So there was very much an argument that it was morally bad for people to be able to get free wood or have somewhere where they could graze their cow to get milk that they weren't having to work for because they should be working to earn a living. And it's amazing how these kind of political tropes are still being run out to this day, and particularly at a time where, you know, we're in a slightly odd interregnum between what has happened up till now and what might happen going forward. It's interesting to note that, and it's something that you hear today, even in terms of things like when people talk about basic income policies or whatever it is. We can't just give people money because then why would anyone work? I read a great stat today, which is apparently 37% of people in Britain believe that it would make no difference if they didn't do their job. Over a third of us are basically working to no productive purpose. And this thing was saying, well, why not just give everyone a wage? Those people could stop doing those non-productive jobs and do something else. And yes, some of them will write terrible poetry and some will write really good poetry, but at least they'll be doing something which they feel is productive. And that is, for me, you know, I came to, I guess, some sense of political awareness around the time that I found out about Crass as a teenager, which was early 80s during the miners' strike and then the strikes at Wapping. And to me, that was the first time this had ever happened. And I think what I discovered writing this book was that it's actually a fight that's been going on for 200, 300 years, maybe more.
It does chime particularly at the moment because of where we are politically with this current government seemingly riding roughshod over many people's, desires, and yet saying no, we're doing it for the greater good. I mean, you could easily see Ian Duncan Smith writing those acts back in 1700 and being peed off because some bloke is indolent because he spends all day wandering after his cattle. I think you say. Yeah. It came across very strongly, and again, I've described the book as timeless because I think it is, but I think it's the cyclical nature of history. I think you demonstrate very well that. We've talked about it very briefly, but the other part of the book is your discovery and your attempts to get to know the forest a little better, learn about it. And again, what worked for me, and you mentioned there are in this type of writing there are some, we'll call them giants because I can't think of a better word, but Ian Sinclair, psychogeographers, and somebody I've not read, but I know, having read about them, Robert Harrison, who's kind of writing about this stuff, and you acknowledge their role in that, and to contrast against them, your own often unheroic attempts to visit the forest and go and discover places. And again, this just made it human and engaging and very likeable for me, because I'm not particularly adept when I go to the forest with my woodcraft folk group. I don't like bugs, I have to say, so I don't like picking up logs and seeing what's under there, kids. It terrifies me. And I've not yet encountered a muntjac deer, but I could imagine, as you did, tell them about the time you encountered a roe deer and muntjac deer.
I've grown to love the muntjac.
Oh, you're going on the dark side. You're becoming Ian.
But if you ever come across them, I don't know if anyone's seen them. They're more like pigs than deer, really. You expect deer to be these lovely pronking things, and they're these small, kind of rodent-y looking things. They were introduced, some lord brought them to his estate in the early 1900s actually, and they escaped, and now they're all over southeast England, and they like going through bins and things, so they tend to hang around in the forest. They're definitely down at the Chingford end. That's their kind of home territory, but they make this funny little trip trot sound when you hear them, which is quite scary. It always sounds like it's behind you, even if they're ahead of you. But it's a bit pathetic to be scared of a tiny deer. But they do attack. There's a big article. The Daily Mail actually did an article about them as a kind of... But it's brilliant. It's a fantastic example of a Daily Mail article, because it basically says that they're aliens an alien incomer who they seem cute, but actually underneath that cuteness they are evil.
Unlike the roe deer, which is like Bambi based.
Yeah, they're a bit pronkier.
And pronkier is another word. There are three words in this I'd never come across before. There's one begins with a C. Catonic. It's from Greek. Anyway, Anyway, sorry.
I can't remember any of the
words. I'm going to get this wrong. Very memorably describe how a roe deer moves away from you by jumping into the light in these ever diminishing spaces. I like that.
Oh, good.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm conscious of the time, and I'm just rambling on. And I know there are some really clever people in this audience. I'm looking at Dan here, because he'll know who those clever people are as well. But no, there are some people here who've read the book, so I think it'd be a good time to perhaps give people the opportunity to ask some questions. People who read the book, but also people who haven't. You've been writing down, Michael, some stuff. So, does anybody have a question? Ralph at the back.
Well, first of all, I want to say I have read the book and I really, really enjoyed it. There were many, many things about it I've enjoyed. Mark's mentioned a lot of them, but just to single out one thing. I mean, a lot of people say about Epping Forest that it's a kind of dark place where kind of murders take place and all sorts of sinister things. So I was interested to see how you handled that side of it in the book, and I loved the chapter where you just kind of like list a number of horrible things that have happened in Epping Forest, because there are just so many.
It's concerning that you like that, because you talk about the purient nature of why those crimes are written in the way that they are. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I suppose that's what you do with that is a way of saying that you just have to kind of condense it somehow. You can't just focus just solely on that. Although I was kind of interested to read about the body in the IKEA bag at Hollow Ponds, just a few years ago. You know, I think I probably took my kids boating there that summer and didn't know that there was a body in an IKEA bag sitting around there. But
I got a neighbour to take me down there and show me where it had been, because I heard about it afterwards, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, my dog passed it for weeks. It was there for weeks."
Yeah, so you couldn't believe it. So, but anyway, the question I was going to ask was just what was the most disturbing thing that you encountered in your research, do you think, for the book?
It's always Ian Duncan Smith, isn't it?
I was going to say it didn't have to be like straight horror. It could just be.
That is straight horror, obviously. Only got a 2,000 majority left now, though.
Yeah.
So if we all work hard, who knows what could happen there next time.
I help with that.
Beyond that, no, a serious answer. The funny thing is just those. The scariest thing in Epping Forest is just those moments where it's something about the light. The light changes, the sun goes in, and it suddenly gets much darker, and you're on your own, and it's maybe slightly late in the day, and the light's going a little bit anyway, and you just come across something, and there's no one around. So there's one particular, you know, people build these dens. There's dens everywhere, but there's one particular one that I came across which is extra weird, because the person who's built it has hung little tassels of rubbishy material all over it. And I remember going there one evening, and the wind kind of went through all these bits, and it went a bit dark, and then I am easily scared. So I think that, rather than anything particularly actually disturbing, and that's the interesting thing about it, is a space, is how much of it is what you put project onto it.
I just remembered, before we went to questions, you were going to read a section about you in the forest.
Oh,
It's a dog thing. So there is a genuine fear of dogs, and as you said, there are a lot of people in the forest with dogs.
Everyone except for me, basically.
We can dub this later, can't we?
Sure. Is that okay if I read another bit? Is that, yes.
We'll still come back for questions.
Okay. All right. 198.
Think of your question.
Yeah, this is your chance to think of a question to stump.
There are parts of this book, and this isn't meant as an insult. This is meant as high praise, because this guy sells a lot of books. But some of the self-deprecating lines, some of the wry observations, did remind me of Bill Bryson. Now, I like Bill Bryson, and I say he's enormously successful and sells a lot of books. So if people only bought this because it was like Bill Bryson, that would be a good thing.
If all of his readers bought it, that would be even better.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really like Bill.
But if you really like Bill Bryson, then I'm happy to go with it. I'll run with it.
While you're waiting,
I'm ready.
Are you there?
Yeah, I found it. Should we do that? Shall I do it? So yeah, it's just, I think it's self-explanatory, so I don't think I'll say anything. I picked up a path through the scrub, the sun extracted by trees, the light dark and bright all at once and close together, so that it spotlit the old lady on the track in front of me. As she stopped, turned back and looked at me. Her Alsatian stopped still, looking too, its eyes round and very black as it sized me up. It waited a moment, allowing time for my imagination to fill the gaps, then began slinking towards me, keeping itself low so that its shoulder blades stood up above its spine, quiet, purposeful. I was being hunted. I stopped walking and waited for the old lady to call the animal back. She didn't. We stood, two fixed points, the dog a vector between us. I tried not to look at it while keeping close tabs on its progress, holding only shoddily to the idea, often imparted to my children, that canines are hungry for attention rather than just hungry. When it was about 4 paces from me, it stopped again, raised its head and stared at me, completely unreadable, blocking the path. None of us moved until, in a slightly whiny voice, I asked her if she could call it back. She didn't appear to do anything much. Perhaps she turned away and started walking again. Perhaps the dog got bored of me. For whatever reason, it swung round and began moving off. I had a problem. There was only one path, and the woman and her dog were on it. I didn't much like the dog, and nor did I want her to think I was following her through the woods. The guilty feeling which had been stalking me since I got off the tube in Thaden Boyce took a step forward and climbed on board. I looked like a weirdo, a rapist, at best a flasher. What other reason did I have for tracking an old lady through the undergrowth? No wonder she'd let her beast come and get a fix on me. I was lucky she hadn't ordered it to go for my throat. Rattled, I assessed my options. I could turn round and go back, but somehow that would be even more suspicious. I could stand here for another 10 minutes, caught between a housing estate and a golf course, pretending to have seen something really interesting. Or I could try to get past and out into the open woods. Luckily, however it may seem, there's never only one path through Epping Forest. After blundering off at a 45-degree angle to the main trail, my feet lifted dressage high above the scrub, I soon picked up another track, wiggly and less well-defined, but good enough that I could accelerate and try to navigate past her. That was my plan: stride out and skirt round in a broad crescent, pick up the path beyond her and move quickly up to where it intersected with one of the forest's big bridle ways. It had the whiff of wishfulness about it, of hopeless hope more than expectation, a lack of conviction which left me exactly where I deserved to be. I came out ahead of her, but near enough for it to seem creepy. She was moving quicker than I'd allowed for, quicker, certainly, than when she'd stood staring at me. She may have thought I was trying to cut her off at the pass. In a sudden turnaround, I was no longer clear whether I was supposed to be the hunter or the hunted. I picked up my pace, trying to leave her behind, hot now, ruffled and discomposed. Reaching the bridleway, I turned a sharp left, tracking back at an acute angle to the path I'd left, so that not only could I see the old lady and the dog near her waist, but see them cutting off the corner, inexorable, gaining on me like the Posse in an outlaw's most fevered sleep. I'd allowed myself to think I'd lost them, and in that moment I knew I needed to piss, regretting my large milky coffee and its diuretic imperative. Now I tramped fast along the bridleway, being overtaken by nice ladies on horses, greeted by nice lady walkers moving in the other direction, and still pursued by my nemesis and her hound. As soon as I saw what looked like a path, I veered right, searching for somewhere discreet to empty myself. The area is called Epping Thicks for a reason. Holly bushes have taken a decisive hold up here, so it's not as easy to choose your own route as it is further south. I worked my way in, ducking and twisting, and even before I started to pee, I knew I'd need to reverse. I was trapped. There was no way through.
Because that's my experience of being in the forest. So it works very well for me.
It's the coffee.
Dan, I know you've read the book and you've seen Will do this before. You've given this more thought. Do you have a question?
High pressure stuff. It looks so rubbish if I say no now. What I was thinking was, Mark said it earlier, I think, you know, that a really central thing about this book is it involves this cast of characters, like John Clare. And I seem to remember you talking at one point about how initially you wanted to avoid William Morris and you wanted to avoid Dick Turpin. Yeah. And you actually ended up involving Dick Turpin in the book, and for me that was one of the more, really, really interesting sections. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about your sort of initial thinking about that and what led you to include him.
I mean, my initial thinking was really that the reason I didn't want to include William Morris was because although I think the William Morris Gallery is now excellent, a few years ago when I moved to Walthamstow, it was my worst nightmare of a museum. It reminded me of that thing where you were a kid and you were taken somewhere worthy, and you, as soon as you get in there, your legs start to feel really tired and there's nowhere to sit down, which is actually all my museum experiences as a kid. But as an adult, it still had that. So there was something about William Morris that just, after that, just annoyed me. Dick Turpin, similarly, I had a very clear picture of that TV series that was on in the 70s when I was growing up with Richard O'Brien, Richard O'Sullivan, thank you, and the sort of flouncy sleeves and so on. So I didn't really want to do that, but I think the reason he does end up in the book is because, I mean, we talked about it a bit, but it's one of the kind of it's one of those double-faceted things about the forest, which is the criminality, that you can't take that part out of the story of what Epping Forest is. So yes, it is a place for artists and poets to go and hide, but if they can hide there, then other people will hide there or use it to hide things too. And also it turns out to be quite an interesting story. So yeah, I was glad that I bothered to do some research and go, oh, okay.
Any other questions? Oh,
I will. Oh yeah. I've not read the book. I'm very much looking forward to. I read somewhere you wrote about, in answer to an interviewer's question, you wrote about how a forest or woods blocks your vision, and that sort of turns some of your thoughts inwards. And I was wondering if it does something similarly to the way you write as well, whether you did some of your writing actually in Epping Forest or afterwards, but it changes the way you write as a writer.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it does change. I mean, the point that I made, it was to do with all the walking that I've traditionally done has been mountain walking. Is that up in the Lake District or whatever is what I've liked to do. It's my dad loves the Lake District. I've gone there every year since I was a kid. I still go now. And when you climb a mountain, you climb for the view. That's the purpose of it in a way. You get to the top or you get up, and it's to do with the way that your perspective on a valley changes. And so when I started going out to the forest, I was trying to climb up trees to see a view, and I'd get up a tree and then find that there was still, you'd still find there was nothing to see. However, you never seem to be able to get high enough to get the view and so you start to think, well, what is it about this then? And yeah, I do think it's. And one of the amazing things about the forest is because of that, is how big, although it isn't that big a space, is how big it seems. I did a walk for a shop down in Hackney, actually, just when the book came out. I took about 30 people out for a walk in the woods, and there was a guy there who said, I've been coming to Epping Forest for 30 years and I've always walked around this bit and I've never been. He was amazed that we were in a bit that he'd never been to. And actually it was just fluke. We were just probably 10 yards from where he had walked, but even 10 yards in the forest, everything looks completely different. And in that sense, it's completely discombobulated. So he was standing there going, "What? Where's this? I've never been here before," which was actually made me look like I actually knew what I was doing, which was nice. I said, "Could you just tell everyone else?" But the wider point, yeah, I think it does change. I think I tried to. I don't know if. I guess consciously, it made me write more. I've certainly never. I mean, I've never written anything about myself before, and the two novels that I had published years ago are not autobiographical in any way, and they're not really personal in that sense at all. So it did. I think that the decision to do that was one of the big decisions in the book, and I think you're right. Yeah, maybe it does have something to do with the landscape that it was about. Yeah.
Thank you.
one final question.
What's your favourite bit of Epping Forest?
Well, you have a favourite tree.
A favourite tree.
Oh dear, I'm never going to live this down, am I? He's the man with a favourite tree. I do have a couple of favourite trees. There's the skull tree that's pictured on the cover that I really love because it's got a skull carved into it, basically. But it's not actually the most picturesque part of the forest. The tree that I climb up at the end is one of my favourite trees. And actually, once again, it's a great example because it's really near to Chingford. It's not in one of the deep bits of the forest that you'd imagine, but it's actually a really beautiful spot. The tree's got this lovely view out in front of it. Actually, it's one of the few areas they've cleared it a little bit, so you do get some view from it. But it's a classic example in that if I was trying to think of a place off the top of my head, I wouldn't have thought of it because it's not in the bit where the trees are the biggest or the most impressive, or the landscape is the most dramatic, but it's just hidden away. And partly it's the fact that it is hidden away within, it's probably 200 metres from the running club that my son runs at every Wednesday night, and so, it's just there, and it's nothing special in lots of ways. And I think kind of what I like about Epping Forest is part of what I like is its unspecialness in a way. Well, in a way, it's amazing that we've got this huge forest sitting right on the edge of a city like London. But on the other hand, I quite like the scrubbiness and the ordinariness of it, and I even quite like a bit of litter. I don't like fly tipping, but I don't mind. I quite like walking along and seeing bottles, and you look at them and it's full of green mold or something as you walk past. That's all part of what makes it a living landscape for me.
Can we throw the question back, and for our benefit, do you have a favourite bit of the forest we should visit?
The area around the Hampton Park seems easy to get to do that.
And I think the other thing is the thing that I like best. The areas that I like best is just any area where you could. And one of the things that's
easy to get.
I guess a theme in the book is that thing about stepping off the main path. The thing, which
the areas that I like best
is just any area where you could. For years with my kids and we do the same walk over and over again. Is that thing about stepping off the main path with everyone else. Which I went up to the forest for years with my kids and we do the same walk over and over again. The brilliant thing about Epping Forest compared to almost any other place, you can go anywhere. Whereas if you're on a footpath across fields, brilliant thing about Epping Forest compared to almost any other all you can do places that you can go anywhere. Whereas in Epping Forest you can just step off across those fields. You have to stay on that track or whatever, and within 10 minutes you'll find yourself somewhere. Whereas in Epping Forest you can just step off.
Like one. I love Ambersbury Banks because it's so incredibly old.
Yeah.
And you talked about how you've done a lot of research and become increasingly familiar with the forest, and yet it still remains strange. Can you say something about how your view of history has changed?
Oh, I don't know if I had a very developed view of history to start off with, but I think the thing that I've lost to some extent is the sense of lostness, which is what I really loved when I first started going out, was just striking off and then getting a bit lost and confused and baffled and getting that little heart thud of, oh my God, I'm lost, how am I going to get home? And now I know it a bit better. I would say it doesn't happen so much, but actually I'm still quite capable of getting lost. So in a sense, knowing a bit more about it is, in some ways, has spoiled some of the things that I liked about it. But yeah, as you say, I didn't, Amesbury Banks and Loughton Camp are two Iron Age embankments really in the forest. Iron Age, they don't, I think one of them they think may have been a cattle enclosure, thank you, there we are. Should have thought of that one. So they're not actually that dramatic, but they are these incredible kind of waves of earth, and getting a sense of how long that landscape's been.
But there's this myth about Boadicea, Queen Boudica coming through, but quite clearly it's been used and inhabited for a very long time. Yeah. You talked a bit about magic, and are there particular moments where you felt that magic through the length of time that's been occupied?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I could say particularly for that reason. I think maybe because I don't know. It's you need a lot of imagination to picture a landscape as occupied in a real sense for that amount of time, and maybe I don't have that. Maybe I'm a bit lacking in that respect. So I think.
I did like how you
rescued
Mike. I did like what you said about this. Local tradition, and you know this, had Ambersbury pegged as the site of the last stand of Boudica when her revolt against the Romans was finally defeated. But apparently, Victorian archaeologists definitively disprove this, which is somehow typical of the Victorians. Is that wry comment that I think is throughout the book?
Got into terrible trouble. I did a talk down in South London, and I managed to... there was a woman sitting in the front row who, first of all, got very upset about me saying that I was scared of dogs because the person who was in your role that night said, "Oh yeah, I hate dogs," and she was really quite upset about this and sort of bridled a little bit. And then I read this bit out, and it turned out she was an archaeologist as well. No, I didn't read it out. I said, "Oh, and that's typical of archaeologists." I forgot my own line. Said, "You know, archaeologists, they ruin everything." And I was met with
South London.
I wasn't. No, that was a lost book sale there. Oh well.
On the subject of sales, I think we should draw this to a close. I'm hugely grateful for everybody who's come along. I'm going to do this thing because authors are too embarrassed. This is a fantastic book. You should buy more than one copy. Waterstones would love that because I think they've overbought and they've got about 60 of them. So tell your friends. You will not regret buying this book. If you do, come and see me and I will reimburse the money for you. None of them will ever remember that. It's not on film or anything. No, it's fantastic. You won't take me up on that. It'll be brilliant. Will, thank you very much for coming to this. I've decided it is the final one of these we're ever going to do because nothing can ever top this. And thanks to the audience, and let's give all of us a big round of applause. We'll sign some of these things if you wish to buy a copy. Despite my urgings, don't feel under any particular pressure to do so, but it would be nice. I do these things every month or so. On the 6th of July, we go back to our normal thing, and we've got this fantastic record producer, inventor of many types of music, Joe Boyd, who's coming along. He wrote a brilliant book about 10 years ago called White Bicycles. And on the back, the blurb is great. It says, Joe Boyd handed Bob Dylan his guitar at the Newport Jazz Festival where he went electric. And he plugged in Jimmy's guitar at Monterey, and he discovered Nick Drake and produced R.E.M. and Billy Bragg and 10,000 Maniacs and everyone. So it'd be great to have him along, and I will ask him, unless somebody else wants to do it. I did try and palm this off on somebody who hasn't come along. Someone who bought a ticket who hasn't come along. I did say about 3 weeks ago, do you fancy doing this Will Ashon thing? And they said no, so it was me.
Didn't turn up. I've got a really good Joe Boyd story actually, which was 10 years ago, was when my first novel was out, and I was booked to do a music festival.
You're going to be interviewing him
on the same tent as him, and he was on right after me, and I sat in this tent, and I think there was about 3 basically children sat while I was doing it, and then as I walked off and they said, "Next Joe Boyd," the tent just filled. It was the most crushing experience ever. I was like,
well, come along on the 6th and let's see if that happens.
I'll be at the back going, bloody hell, he's done it again.
No, but honestly, thank you very much to everyone for coming. Once again, Will Ashon. And Waterstones. All of the help these guys give. Sorry about that, James. Right, Mom. Are you going for a pint? You got time to go for a pint with people if they want to go for a beer?
Yeah,
Just say
just say what dedication. I don't know what to do.
and again, it's all grass.
I've got a good one.